He'd paid for a first-class seat just like everyone else. Nothing fancy, just a little legroom, a window, and a moment of quiet after a long week. But then a flight attendant asked him to move, for someone supposedly more important. What unfolded after that made national headlines. Malcolm Reeves wasn't trying to prove a point. He wasn't thinking about justice or policies or making a scene. All he could think about was his apartment, his 2 boys, and whether he still had time to grab ribs from that little joint off Parkview before it closed. His keynote at the Denver Innovation Summit had gone better than expected. A packed room, standing ovation, and even a few nods from potential investors afterward. But now, rolling his suitcase through Terminal 3 at Grant International, he just wanted stillness. His first-class boarding pass felt like a small reward. A moment by the window, early boarding, some extra space for his knees. Nothing wild. He'd paid for it like anyone else. After 3 days of non-stop networking, it would be his first real moment of solitude. Malcolm was a tall man, broad-shouldered, the kind of build that hinted at a football past. These days, though, his strength was mostly spent behind laptops and conference calls. His beard was streaked with gray, but his eyes were sharp, the kind of sharp you earn when you've had to prove yourself twice over just to get half as far. He lived in Fair Hill now, but he'd spent years bouncing between short-term gigs in cities he barely had time to learn, all to build the kind of life others now assumed had come easy. That day he wore jeans, a blue blazer, and sneakers that had seen a lot of airports. No luxury labels, no need. He'd learned long ago that real authority doesn't always look like it. Sometimes it just looks like a man sitting quietly in seat 2A, minding his own. The first red flag came just before takeoff. He was skimming through emails when a flight attendant approached, her smile professional but empty. "Mr. Reeves," she said softly, leaning just slightly. "We have a small favor to ask." He looked up. "Sure. One of our frequent flyers is seated toward the back." He was expecting an upgrade. There was a mix-up. Would you be open to switching seats with him? Malcolm blinked, confused. "I'm sorry." "Why?" She hesitated. "He's a member of our Premier Loyalty Program. This was a preferred upgrade request." Malcolm glanced around. The cabin wasn't even full. She wasn't pointing to another front seat. She was motioning to row 26. He gave a small smile. "I'd rather keep my seat, thanks. I paid for it." Her lips thinned just slightly. "Of course. I'll inform the team." He figured that was the end of it. It wasn't. 5 minutes later, another staff member arrived, this time older, with a clipboard and a voice that left less room for negotiation. "Sir, we understand you've declined to switch seats," she said, "but unfortunately, you'll need to move. It's our policy in the event of seating conflicts involving elite tier passengers." Malcolm blinked. "Elite tier? Is he with your staff?" "No," she said, "but he holds Diamond Preferred status. We're asking for your cooperation." He stayed calm. "I reserved this seat. Paid for it days ago. No one mentioned any conflict until now." Passengers nearby had started to glance up. The attendant leaned in again. "We can offer a complimentary drink and a $75 travel voucher for the inconvenience." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "So, I'm being asked to move because someone else is more valuable to your airline?" She didn't respond. Malcolm sighed, breathed in slowly. "I'm not moving." The attendant didn't push, just nodded curtly and left. But then, 5 minutes later, a third crew member showed up. Younger, clipboard in hand, fake smile in place. No explanation, no apology. "Mr. Reeves, please collect your things. You've been reassigned to seat 26B. No choice, just procedure." Malcolm stared at her, then at the seat he'd paid for. His chest tightened, not from rage, but disbelief. He stood, slowly. Every eye in the cabin seemed to shift his way. Some passengers looked away quickly. Others didn't bother pretending. A young woman in 13C whispered, "That's not right." An older man gave him a nod, sympathy maybe, or guilt. Malcolm didn't say a word. He lifted his carry-on, walked toward the back, and slid it into the overhead above 26B. Then he sat. The seat was squeezed between a teenager in basketball shorts and an older woman who kept asking if this flight was headed to Jackson. Malcolm didn't respond. He stared straight ahead, trying to push down the heat rising up his chest. He'd dealt with worse. He'd seen worse. But this was different. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was smooth. It was routine. The man who now sat in his seat, probably late 40s. Tan polo shirt, salt and pepper hair, and the kind of unbothered ease of someone who's never been told no. He didn't even look back, not once. The man who had taken Malcolm's seat didn't glance back once, not out of guilt, not even out of acknowledgement. It was as if he hadn't displaced anyone at all, as if the space had always belonged to him. Malcolm had long since learned how to shrink himself in spaces like this. But this felt worse. Not because it was louder or crueler, but because it was so smooth, so sanctioned. This wasn't a backroom decision or a whispered slight in a boardroom. This was aisle 13 of a commercial flight, a public space, a transaction. Something every day people could understand because it had happened to many of them, just not with a camera rolling. He took out his phone, not to post, not to reach out, but to find something, anything, to distract his mind. But even through his earbuds, he could still hear whispers. Row 24. That's the guy they moved, right? Yeah, that was weird. I think he said he paid for that seat. It was like a slow wave of unease was rippling through the cabin. The man beside Malcolm shifted in his seat, glancing his way. That was messed up, man. Malcolm didn't say anything. He wasn't trying to spark a protest at 30,000 feet. He didn't want people applauding him for standing his ground. He just wanted the plane to land, just wanted to go home, hug his kids, fix his wife's broken shoe rack like he'd promised. But something had shifted. Not in the turbulence or altitude, something more subtle, something social, the kind of change you could feel but not name. Silence turned into tension. Tension turned into questions. 2 rows ahead, a girl, young, maybe high school age, was editing a video on her phone. Her name was Lena Ortiz, and she was flying back to Fairview after a weekend with her aunt. She hadn't meant to film anything important. She just liked capturing moments for her stories. But when she saw the steward lean in and speak to that man, something told her to press record. Now, with the plane's Wi-Fi live, she uploaded the short clip to TikTok. No commentary, no effects, just 4 words. He paid for it. In the seat beside her, someone gasped, but Lena didn't say anything. She just watched the progress bar, watched the video go live, and waited. Malcolm still hadn't opened his phone again. He was trying to focus on other things. His daughter's science presentation, his son's JV basketball tryouts, whether the dry cleaner had found the missing cufflink from his blazer. Mundane human things. But even in the back, he could hear the sound of silverware clinking on glass from up front. Heard laughter, heard the new occupant of seat 2A ask for sparkling water like it had been waiting for him. The attendants had suddenly become more cheerful, more attentive, more performative. When Malcolm finally flipped his phone over again, his screen was lit up like a city skyline. 3 missed calls. 2 messages from coworkers, a message with a link, and a note from one of them. "Dude, you're going viral." He frowned, clicked. There he was. The footage was clear, his voice steady. That moment, the exact second when the flight attendant said company policy, and he, in return, had calmly replied, "I paid for this seat." The comment section was already flooding. Still happening in 2025. This guy handled it better than I would have. Give him a refund and a public apology. This is ridiculous. It felt strange, like reading a transcript of something that had happened to someone else. The entire moment, one that had felt small and isolating in real time, had become something loud, shared, seen, And it wasn't rage he felt. It wasn't pride either. It was disbelief. The man in basketball shorts nudged his elbow. "You gonna say something?" Malcolm inhaled slowly. "I don't know yet." What he didn't realize was that miles below, a local news producer had already flagged the video. An editor was trimming the clip. A headline was being typed. And by the time wheels touched down at Clark Regional Airport, the story had already outgrown the airplane. As the plane taxied, Malcolm noticed it. More looks than usual. Not the curious kind, the knowing kind. Subtle glances over shoulders. Passengers whispering while pretending to scroll. Even the aisle felt different, like people were trying to figure out what exactly they'd just witnessed. Lena, the teenager, stood just enough to see him again, then quickly sat back down. Not ashamed, not smug, just concerned. Malcolm switched off airplane mode. His phone lit up instantly, buzzing so violently it slipped from his lap onto the floor. Old colleagues, reporters, emails from names he barely recognized, a LinkedIn message from someone claiming to be with the North Star Gazette. And then came the push notifications. Black passenger removed from first-class seat after loyalty member complains. Passenger bumped mid-flight. Airline under fire. He read the headlines twice. They didn't feel real, but they were. The man beside him leaned in again. "You see that?" "Yeah," Malcolm said quietly. "You all right?" "I will be." As the line to D-board crawled forward, a woman in a beige tote turned to glance at him, then quickly looked away. Another man raised his phone, not even trying to be subtle about it. He was recording Malcolm as he stood. The man turned his head, uneasy. This wasn't about viral fame. It never had been. He had asked for nothing except to keep what he'd paid for. But now his face was a headline. Now his quiet had become a message, and the story was no longer his alone. As Malcolm stepped toward the front of the aircraft, he could feel the weight of eyes on his back, some curious, some quiet, with shame. A man in a floral shirt held up his phone, filming openly. He didn't even bother to hide it. Malcolm turned his face away, a wave of discomfort rising in his chest. As he reached the exit, the place where VIPs usually disembarked first, he paused. The same flight crew who had orchestrated the whole thing stood in a tight line by the galley. 3 attendants, the first one still wearing that same trained smile, the others more stiff than before. He didn't speak. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at each of them, one by one, long enough that they'd know he saw them. But none of them met his gaze. Then he stepped off the plane. Inside the terminal, barely 5 minutes passed before someone approached him. A young man, barely out of his teens, hoodie pulled tight over his head, was walking toward him with hesitant energy. "Mr. Reeves?" Malcolm turned, eyes tired. "Yeah, I saw the video. What they did. That wasn't okay. And I just wanted to say thank you." "For not yelling, for how you handled it. You kept your cool. I don't think I could have." Malcolm gave a quiet nod. "Appreciate it." The young man lingered for a beat, then disappeared back into the crowd. Malcolm walked slowly, dragging his carry-on in one hand while his phone buzzed endlessly in the other. It didn't feel like walking through an airport anymore. It felt like walking through a spotlight. By the time he reached the exit, another ping hit his inbox. A bland corporate email, this time from a JetBridge Air address. "We are aware of your recent experience on Flight 882. A representative will be in contact shortly. Thank you for your feedback. We value your business." He didn't even open it fully, just locked the screen and exhaled. Outside, the sun had dipped low. He called for a rideshare and sat on a bench by the curb. Across from him, a man stood, phone in hand, watching something intently. It didn't take long to realize what it was. His own face, on someone else's screen. The man looked up and froze when he noticed Malcolm sitting directly across from him. He lowered the phone, embarrassed, and turned away quickly, but the damage was done. The moment wasn't his anymore. It belonged to the public now. By sunrise, his name was everywhere, plastered across morning show segments, blogs, news tickers, and social media feeds. But the conversation had shifted. It wasn't just about the video anymore. It had become about the system. Users were digging into JetBridge's loyalty tiers, questioning how often power and preference were used to excuse mistreatment, how many other passengers had been quietly shuffled, downgraded, or dismissed under the mask of policy. The online fury wasn't just reaction, it was coordination. That morning, Malcolm awoke to 142 unread messages and 5 missed calls. 2 were from private numbers. 1 was from a Detroit news station. The last was from a woman named Delia Morgan, a senior producer at a national morning program. He rubbed his face, exhausted, still trying to wrap his head around the fact that all of this had happened just because he'd said no. While his hotel coffee brewed in the background, he unlocked his phone again. The messages hadn't stopped. Comments, mentions, journalists, strangers, some reaching out just to say, "We saw you. We heard you. Thank you." His email inbox lit up again. Subject line: "Good morning from CNN. We'd love to speak with you today." He let the phone fall back onto the comforter. Not out of frustration, more like surrender, like something heavy settling inside him. Across the country, JetBridge's public relations team was scrambling. By 8 a.m. Eastern, they released a carefully worded statement. "We are aware of the incident involving Mr. Malcolm Reeves on Flight 882. JetBridge is committed to upholding the highest standards of hospitality and respect for all our passengers. We are conducting an internal review and will take the appropriate steps necessary." The response landed with a thud. Comments poured in by the thousands. "So you're sorry he had an experience. Not that you caused it? What are JetBridge's values exactly? Still no apology to the actual person you humiliated?" Users began sharing older posts, passengers from past years who'd had similar experiences. One woman from 2019 wrote about being reassigned mid-boarding so that a high-ranking loyalty member could sit with his colleague. She was 8 months pregnant. That post began circulating again, this time next to Malcolm's story. Back in Fairhill, Malcolm finally answered one of the calls. Delia Morgan's voice came through, professional but warm. "Mr. Reeves, thank you for taking the time. I'll keep this brief. We've seen the footage. We understand this probably isn't how you expected your week to go." He chuckled dryly. "Not even close. If you're open to speaking on the show, we'll give you space to share your version. No filters, no scripts." He was quiet, then asked, "And what would you expect me to say?" "Whatever feels honest," she replied. "We're not looking for sound bites." Another pause. "I don't want to be part of something staged," Malcolm said. "Understood. I'm not trying to start a war. But people need to understand how normal it felt, how no one even blinked when it happened." Delia didn't push. "If you change your mind, we'll be here." He did, about an hour later, not because he wanted to be famous, but because the messages kept coming from parents, teachers, delivery drivers, engineers, people across industries who whispered their own version of what had happened. One message struck a nerve. It came from someone who claimed to be a flight attendant. No name, no details, just the words, "I've been told to do that before. Move someone with no status for someone who spends more. I hated it. I hated myself for going along with it. I'm sorry this happened to you." Malcolm stared at the screen, and for the first time since it all began, he felt something he hadn't let himself feel yet. Not rage, not sadness, just seen. That evening, Malcolm sat in a modest hotel room, dimly lit by a desk lamp and the soft glow of a laptop screen. He wore a plain black shirt, no logos, no distractions, and positioned himself in front of the small webcam built into his computer. He stared straight ahead. No script, no teleprompter, just truth. He cleared his throat, drew in a steady breath, and began. I want to talk about what happened to me on Flight 882. His tone was even, not angry, not bitter, just grounded. He didn't name names, didn't accuse. He simply laid out the facts, how quickly it all unfolded, how methodically it was handled, how calmly the staff acted as they removed him from his seat without pause or apology. And most of all, how no one ever stopped to ask what it might feel like to be told in front of a cabin full of strangers that someone else's loyalty points mattered more than his paid ticket. "I'm not looking for handouts," he said. "I'm not trying to punish anyone. But I do think there's a question worth asking here. How many people get treated like this when there's no camera nearby? The video lasted just under 4 minutes. It didn't need more. By sunrise, it had been viewed over 6 million times. Malcolm had never chased the spotlight. He preferred quiet effort, long nights behind the scenes, steady work, and the slow grind of earning respect without demanding it. But now his voice echoed through office cubicles and school lunchrooms, played in waiting areas and kitchen radios, quoted online like it came from a movie. Only it wasn't a movie, it was just a man telling the truth. By the next morning, his inbox was flooded. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. National shows, influencers, podcasts, magazine writers. Some offered plane tickets and hotel suites. Others hinted at partnerships and long-term campaigns. He declined nearly all of them. He only accepted 2 interviews, one with a local Detroit news anchor and the other with NPR. He didn't want spectacle. He wanted honesty, something real, not curated. In the quiet studio of the local station, Malcolm sat across from the host with the same quiet strength he carried in his video. His hands rested calmly in his lap, his voice steady, his gaze direct. The host leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Reeves," she said gently, "a lot of people are calling you a symbol, a voice for change. Some are even calling you a hero. How do you feel about that?" Malcolm almost smiled. "Almost? I feel like I got removed from a seat I paid for," he said. "That doesn't make me a hero. That just makes me human." He paused, then added, "I think this story connected with people because it's not unusual. Everyone's had a moment where they were told, even without words, you don't belong here, even when you've earned the right to be there." The host didn't interrupt. She let the silence breathe. Malcolm continued, "The part I can't shake is that no one ever said sorry, not really. No one looked me in the eye and said, 'We got this wrong.' They just followed the manual, with tight smiles and printed vouchers. But I don't think they ever saw me. That clip aired the same day. It didn't mention race. It didn't make accusations. But it landed. And it landed hard. Because it was honest. Because it was real. Meanwhile, at JetBridge Air's headquarters in San Diego, panic had settled in. Executives gathered in emergency meetings. Legal teams reviewed footage. PR reps drafted statements, then deleted them. Then started again. Some pushed for a full public apology. Others warned that doing so would be seen as admitting fault. Investors were growing restless. What finally pushed them wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't a viral tweet from a celebrity. It was the thousands of everyday people sharing their stories. A woman wrote about being forced to give up her seat while 8 months pregnant so a business traveler could sit with his partner. A man recalled being quietly bumped from first class to coach, with no explanation, minutes after a high-tier flyer arrived late. Stories flooded the internet, not just a handful, hundreds. Each different, but with a shared thread, the normalization of quiet, polite mistreatment in the name of customer tears. Malcolm read many of them, not all, but enough to realize this wasn't about him anymore. For the first time since the flight, he didn't feel isolated. The humiliation, the tension, it wasn't unique. It was just usually invisible. A few days later, Malcolm was invited to speak at a roundtable hosted by the Department of Transportation. The room was lined with airline executives, policy advisors, and representatives from across the industry. When it was his turn to speak, he stood slowly. took a breath, looked each person in the eye. "I'm not here for applause," he said. "I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm asking you to hear me. Because if you don't, this is going to happen again. And next time it might not be caught on camera." There was no applause, just quiet. Later, as the session ended and people began to file out, a woman approached him. She looked no older than 25, wearing a name badge from a different airline. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "I've been in aviation 3 years. We see this stuff, more than anyone talks about." Malcolm nodded once, then asked, gently but firmly, "And what are you doing about it?" She looked down. "Trying," she said. "We see this kind of thing way more often than we admit." The young airline staffer's words still echoed in Malcolm's mind long after she walked away. He'd heard words like that before, quiet acknowledgments behind closed doors, whispered confessions that rarely made it into policy. But this time, he wasn't content with sympathy. He wasn't waiting for permission. He was moving. And JetBridge Air was about to feel it. The fallout came faster than anyone expected. By Thursday afternoon, just 4 days after the incident, the airline released a second statement. This time, the tone was unmistakably different. Gone were the vague regrets and safe corporate phrasing. "We offer a formal apology to Mr. Malcolm Reeves. Our internal review has confirmed that procedures were not followed appropriately on Flight 882. The flight crew involved has been terminated, effective immediately. We are implementing mandatory training across all service levels to prevent future violations of passenger rights." It wasn't perfect, but it was something. The headlines followed in waves. JetBridge fires crew after viral flight incident. Airline overhauls loyalty policy. Amid backlash, passenger downgrade ignites industry reckoning. Back in Fairhill, Lena Ortiz, the teenager who captured the now famous clip, posted a follow-up video. Her tone was quieter this time, more thoughtful. He could have just let it go. Most adults do, but he didn't. He spoke up, and that meant something. For people like me. Others began tagging Malcolm in their own stories. Screenshots of internal memos surfaced, not just from JetBridge, but from competitors too. Airlines were quietly reevaluating how priority seats were assigned. Pledges were being made, policies rewritten. Malcolm didn't respond to most of it. He didn't have to. He'd become more than the guy who got bumped from his seat. He'd become a symbol of something deeper, a reminder that sometimes the smallest stand can expose something much bigger. Inside JetBridge HQ, nerves were running high. The flight attendants involved in the reassignment had been dismissed. So had the lead supervisor. The gate agent who approved the last-minute override. Gone. Their names weren't released publicly, but within industry circles, the message was loud and clear. This would not be swept quietly under the rug. In the days that followed, a whistleblower stepped forward. An anonymous letter was sent to several media outlets. The contents were damning, an unspoken but widely practiced directive to prioritize elite-tier flyers even at the expense of confirmed paid passengers. Loyalty overrides, the letter called them. Malcolm read the article in silence late one evening, the glow of his phone screen the only light in the room. Beside him on the couch, his wife Celeste scrolled through her own feed, eyebrows furrowed. "You all right?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Just trying to wrap my head around all of this." Celeste reached over and took his hand. "You didn't ask for any of this, but the way you handled it? That matters." He looked at her, tired but steady. "I didn't even raise my voice." "I know," she said, "and that's probably what shook them the most." That weekend, a national magazine ran a full feature, "A Seat Taken: How One Quiet Passenger Challenged an Industry." The article opened with a striking photo, Malcolm sitting upright, eyes focused, not speaking into a mic, not waving a banner, just present. A man who refused to disappear. The pressure built fast. JetBridge's CEO was forced to hold a live press conference. Reporters didn't hold back, asking about the long-standing policies, the crew decisions, the systemic silence. The CEO swallowed hard. "We failed," he said, "and we are taking responsibility, not because of public reaction, but because we must." Skeptics were cautious, but many admitted it was rare to hear that kind of blunt accountability from corporate leadership. Other airlines were watching closely. Skyglide, Blue Hawk, and Westway each released their own statements in the days that followed, promising transparent reviews of seating policies. Some even opened public inboxes, encouraging passengers to share past experiences. And still, Malcolm returned home quietly. His kids didn't fully understand the scope of what had happened. To them, he was still just Dad, the guy who overcooked Saturday pancakes, folded laundry all wrong, and could never remember the smart TV password. But even they sensed something had shifted. One night, his daughter Nia, 11, climbed onto the couch next to him, chin resting on her knees. "Daddy," she asked, "why did they make you move?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. Because they thought the other man mattered more. Was he more important? Malcolm looked at her. "No," he said softly. "But that's what they believed. And sometimes if no one says anything, people keep believing things that aren't true." She nodded slowly. "Is that why you talked on the news?" He smiled. "Yeah. I wanted people to think more about what fairness really looks like, but it wasn't just a conversation anymore." Malcolm had unintentionally started something no one could just reshuffle back to coach. 2 weeks after the flight, he received a message that caught him completely off guard. It wasn't from a network or another news anchor. It came from Ronald Shep, a senior executive at Harbor Sky Group, the umbrella company that oversaw multiple U.S. airlines, including JetBridge. The subject line was short. "We'd like to speak with you. Off the record." Malcolm stared at it. He didn't respond right away. He closed the laptop and let the moment sit. Something about it didn't feel right. Not yet. He wasn't interested in being the new face of anyone's PR recovery plan. He wasn't looking to shake hands in a conference room or smile for a carefully posed photo. He just wanted to make sure that what happened to him didn't quietly happen to someone else. Malcolm never wanted to be a symbol, and he certainly wasn't looking to become a brand. He wasn't chasing partnerships or panels or podcast features. He just wanted people to be treated with respect. Still, 2 days after that email from Harbor Sky's executive board, curiosity nudged him. He dialed the number. Ronald Shep answered on the second ring. "Mr. Reeves," the voice said, calm and courteous. "Thanks for calling. I'll get right to it. We've been following your story. And some of us, we're listening. We'd like to invite you to consult with our leadership board. The focus would be on customer fairness and internal oversight. It's paid, no contracts or obligations. We just need more voices like yours in the room." Malcolm sat in silence for a few seconds before finally asking, "Why me?" "Because you told the truth," Ronald said, "and people believed you. And what is it you're trying to change?" There was a pause, then honesty. "We don't fully know yet. That's why we're calling you." Malcolm told him he'd think about it. That evening, he sat on the porch, the air cool, his cup of tea warm in his hand. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting soft pools of light on the quiet street. Celeste came outside, curling her legs beneath her on the bench beside him. He told her about the call. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think they're afraid of more bad press," he said, half smiling. She shrugged. "Probably. But that doesn't mean you can't help shape something better." Malcolm nodded, her words settling deep. He thought back to that flight, how practiced it had all felt. The way the attendant had smiled as she removed him from his seat, like it was just another minor request, like she was offering peanuts instead of undoing someone's dignity. He'd never forget that feeling. But maybe, just maybe, he could help make sure someone else never had to feel it. The next morning, he replied to Ronald's email. "I'll do it, on one condition." His request was simple but powerful. Every meeting would begin with an anonymous, unedited testimony from a real passenger or crew member. No logos, no filters, just a voice, just the truth. Read aloud in that room before anyone touched a whiteboard. Ronald agreed without hesitation. 2 weeks later, Malcolm found himself in a sleek glass conference room in Dallas. 12 executives sat in pressed suits around a long table, flanked by graphs, charts, and projections. A whiteboard was covered in numbers. About 30 minutes in, someone leaned forward, a woman with neatly styled hair and a silver pen in hand. "Do you think the public overreacted?" she asked. Malcolm looked up. Calm? Steady? "No," he said. "I think the public had just been waiting for something they could finally see." She didn't ask again. Over the next month, Malcolm worked with the team to help design what would become known as the Seat Fairness Framework, a plain language policy that placed real limits on involuntary reassignments, regardless of loyalty status. 2 more airlines adopted it within months. The policy was later cited during a federal aviation standards review. It didn't make him rich. That had never been the goal. He still wore the same old watch, the one with the small crack near the face. Still drove his aging hybrid with the squeaky air vent. Still made eggs that were slightly too runny on weekends. But every now and then, a letter would arrive. One from a high school teacher in Missouri. Stuck with him. "I show your interview to my students when we talk about how small actions can ripple into big changes. I tell them, you don't need to shout. Just stay where you are if you've earned that space." He printed that letter and taped it inside the drawer of his home office desk. He didn't tour the country. He didn't go on talk shows or publish a book. He went back to work, back to his family, back to the life he'd always valued. But the next time he flew, a quiet morning flight to Sacramento, Seat 1C, he boarded without fanfare. He took his seat, no questions asked. The flight attendant approached with a polite smile. "Anything I can get you before takeoff, mister?" "Reeves." Malcolm looked out the window for a moment, clouds soft and still. Then he turned back to her with a gentle nod. "No, thank you," he said. "I'm good right here." Because sometimes staying seated is the most powerful stand you can take.